is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Hundreds of Ukrainian fighters leave the Mariupol steelworks after being trapped for more than 2 months and are taken to Russian-controlled territory.
President Erdogan says he'll block Finland and Sweden's bids to join NATO, but the Finnish president says he's confident Turkey will change its mind.
The British government will change the law to override parts of the Brexit deal on Northern Ireland. It says it will keep talking to the EU.
And Elon Musk says his Twitter takeover cannot move forward unless the company can prove it has fewer than 5% fake accounts. Ukraine's defence ministry says more than 260 fighters have left the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol and been taken to Russian-held territory.
The Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister says more than 50 severely injured servicemen were evacuated to a hospital in the Russian-controlled town of Novoazovsk. Hundreds of soldiers and civilians were trapped for weeks in the industrial complex as Russian forces bombarded the port city. Let's talk to Associated Press reporter Kieran McQuillan, who's in Lviv. So, Kieran, what's the latest on these Ukrainian fighters?
Well, we haven't heard very much from them since they crossed over into Russian territory last night, Russian-controlled territory, I should say. But the preamble to all of this started on Friday when there was this suggestion of a swap or an exchange of some of the high-profile Russian prisoners of war, which Ukraine is holding. There's no knowledge of how many, in fact, they are holding, but we do know that there are some high-profile members of that, one of them being the goddaughter to one of President Putin's daughters. Now, over the weekend, the office of the Deputy Prime Minister, Irina Vereshchuk, said that these negotiations were ongoing. She's the lady tasked with this. And she said that the focus was on 30 to 60 of these most critically wounded of the Azovstal fighters. These are the people who have got tuberculosis or immunocompromised. Some of them have got very makeshift amputations, so really in a terrible state. They needed to get them out. It was a humanitarian corridor, was therefore agreed. The Russian Defense Ministry saying this on Saturday. We didn't hear much yesterday, but last night then these pictures emerged of this group of Azovstal fighters. Instead of the 30 to 60 that we thought we would see, there was in fact, by Ukrainian counts, 264. Now, they were separated. 53 of the critically ill were taken to the city of Novoazovsk in the Donetsk region. This is Russian-held territory. The other 211 were taken elsewhere. We're not really sure where they are now. And President Zelensky, on his nightly address, addressed this and said that Ukraine needs to keep Ukrainian heroes alive. Now, today the Minister of Defense of this country, Alexei Reznikov, said that the ICRC and the UN are very closely involved and they're coordinating with them in this ongoing operation, as he called it. He said, and I quote, "Our plan is to save their lives and their freedom." And I think that sums up this whole situation very well, because last night many Ukrainians were taken by surprise. The Azov fighters had said that they were going to fight till the last man standing, and an Azov brigade member last night appeared on a video link saying that they were following the orders of the high command of the Ukrainian army. Now, not surprisingly, there are a couple of different narratives evolving here. One from the Ukrainian side saying that this is an evacuation, a humanitarian effort. The other from the Russian side saying that this is a surrender.
And Kieran, Azovstal was, of course, Ukraine's last stronghold in Mariupol. So what does this mean for the war now?
Well, Russia will, of course, be able to portray this as some sort of capitulation from the Ukrainian side. You know, basically, some people would argue that Mariupol, fell in early April when the mayor of the city said that it had been erased off the map. And, you know, there's so much about this city that embolizes what's going on in this war. Now, for the Russian side, you know, they will inherit a hulk of a city. They will inherit a port that needs to be dredged up. And, of course, very few population left there. A lot of the citizens have been evacuated. So this effort to create this land corridor from the occupied Crimea Peninsula to the Donetsk region, the Russians may pay a very heavy price for this. The new front line has now opened up in the Donetsk region. That's where Ukraine really is focusing its military efforts.
Kieran, thanks very much. Kieran McQuillan, Associated Press reporter in Lviv.
Russia's parliament is looking at banning exchanging Ukrainian fighters from Azovstal steelworks for Russian servicemen. Let's get more from our correspondent Julia Chapman, who's in Moscow. But a reminder that reporters in Russia are working under strict media laws that restrict what they can say. Julia, what more do we know about the fate of the Azovstal fighters?
Well, so far, Russian officials don't seem to be engaging with the idea that there could be a prisoner swap. In fact, if anything, we're hearing more calls for them to be tried for war crimes. Today, in the Russian parliament, Vyacheslav Volodin, the speaker of the lower house, the Duma, said that these men are Nazi war criminals and they should be brought to justice. That idea was supported by another prominent MP, Leonid Slutsky, who went even further and said that if found guilty of war crimes, these men should be hung, suggesting that capital punishment be brought back here in Russia in certain circumstances. Now, the Kremlin says that these men will be treated humanely and in accordance with international law. That doesn't bring everybody a huge amount of hope. Russia often accused of flouting international law. But, of course, Ukraine views these fighters as heroes who managed to prevent Russia from making further inroads in Ukrainian territory, and it will be doing everything it can to secure their safety.
And Julia, what about the latest on negotiations between Moscow and Kyiv, the peace negotiations?
Today, both countries have confirmed that the broader peace talks have ground to a halt, confirming that they are no longer speaking face-to-face or virtually on a semi-daily basis, if at all. Ukraine accuses Russia of failing to negotiate in good faith, saying that Russia was only using the peace negotiations for the purposes of domestic propaganda to show the Russian people that they were trying to achieve peace through these talks, but then blaming Ukraine when they all fell apart. Russia has accused Ukraine of failing to respond to its draft peace agreement. So both sides saying that this is not a tenable process at the moment. Of course, the evacuation of the Azovstal fighters did involve the negotiators from both sides, but it also had the heavy involvement of the United Nations and the International Committee for the Red Cross. So while that was a limited success in negotiations, in the view of some people, the broader peace talks do not seem to be going very well.
Julia Chapman in Moscow, thank you.
And as we've been hearing, the Azovstal steel plant was Ukraine's last pocket of resistance in Mariupol.
The strategic port city has witnessed some of the worst shelling in the war. Alyosha Milenkovich is embedded with the Russian military and filed this report.
The Russians feel the end is near.
The rest of the city has been cleared.
The interview came to an abrupt stop as the shelling intensified.
Okay. We are asked to move from here because we were too long in one place, and the people who are actually escorting us are suggesting to leave as soon as possible because we might attract attention from the other side.
On the way back to the city center, we passed scenes of absolute carnage in the town's residential areas. Not a single house or apartment has survived the street battles. There's even a makeshift shallow grave in front of one of those. Here lies Alexander Ilyich, born in 1947, killed on March 19 this year. It was impossible to give people a proper burial. Because of the fighting, many were given a hasty farewell.
We hoped there wouldn't be such a huge loss, but since they hide in our homes and shoot from there, then the casualties are understandable. But the mood here is different. Some are crying and some aren't. There are different perspectives.
Gleb is a local activist, one of many who are helping the new authorities distribute humanitarian aid to thousands around the city. This humanitarian center is located in what was once a huge supermarket. But not everyone can come here and get help, like this 83-year-old Olevtina, who we met in one of the semi-preserved buildings.
I'm alone now. My neighbors have been feeding me. They're good neighbors. I don't have anyone here. My granddaughter was wounded and they took her to Khabarovsk, and I was left alone. There is nobody here for me, only the neighbors that are helping me.
Olevtina is just one of thousands in Mariupol who needs help. A long and difficult journey is ahead of them. Aljosha Milenkovic, CGTN, Mariupol.
Turkey is threatening to block Sweden and Finland's bids for NATO membership, but the Finnish president says he's optimistic an agreement can be reached.
Sauli Niinistö made the comments as he began a two-day visit to Sweden. Our correspondent Jim Stemman reports from Stockholm.
Just in the last couple of hours, Finnish lawmakers voted overwhelmingly to join NATO. Now, the Finnish foreign minister says that that request will be signed sometime today. Sweden's foreign minister, for her part, she signed Sweden's request earlier this morning. And the Finnish president is currently on a state visit to Sweden. That visit was meant to be a two-day state visit, but it's likely to get cut short a little bit due to the president and the Swedish prime minister actually going to Washington to meet Joe Biden on Thursday. Now, the Finnish president, while here in Stockholm, he praised the Nordic leadership model as responsible, strong, and stable. And he really stressed the fact that the military here in the Nordics is among Europe's strongest and will be even stronger together.
This visit comes at an historic time. Sweden and Finland are jointly applying for membership of NATO. Our security policies have for a long time been similar, and also now, when the situation demands it, we take our steps together.
In terms of that visit then to Washington, one of the things that are likely to be discussed and maybe even strategized around will be Turkey's opposition to these two Nordic NATO bids. There was a plan essentially for some senior politicians here in Sweden and in Finland to possibly travel to Ankara and meet with the Erdogan administration. Erdogan does not welcome the Nordic countries coming to Turkey at this point to discuss that. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Obviously, at the heart of this is what Erdogan and in fact his party calls Nordic countries essentially harboring terrorists. So we're going to have to wait and see how that develops over the weeks and months ahead. I did manage to speak to Turkish analysts who said that part of this could be some posturing by Erdogan ahead of the elections next year, and obviously stressed the fact that Turkey does not actually have a history of blocking any countries from joining NATO in the past.
Italian energy giant Eni says it started the process of opening two accounts with Gazprom Bank, one in euros and the other in rubles, to pay for Russian gas. The company said it's doing so out of precaution. Opening accounts in rubles at a Russian bank to pay for gas is thought to breach the EU's sanctions against Moscow, but guidance from the European Commission is open to interpretation.
JD.com has beaten Wall Street estimates for first quarter revenue after it boosted market share during COVID lockdowns. China's second largest online retailer reported a better than expected 18% rise in revenue, though it still saw a net loss of $296 million. The announcement pushed JD shares sharply higher.
India's air conditioner manufacturers are expecting record sales this year because of a heat wave. An industry body says as many as 9 million units could be sold this year. That's up from the previous record of 6.5 million. But COVID lockdowns in China are delaying deliveries.
Hundreds of Indonesian farmers have been protesting against a ban on exporting palm oil, a move they say has slashed their income. The government stopped shipments of palm oil products at the end of April to try and stem soaring prices for domestic cooking oil. Indonesia is the world's largest palm oil exporter.
Coming up on CGTN, the number of people unemployed in the UK falls to record lows, but wages are failing to keep up with soaring food and fuel prices.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freevee.
The UK has announced plans to unilaterally abandon part of its post-Brexit trade deal.
The government's introducing changes to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which deals with how goods enter Northern Ireland from other parts of the UK. The UK's foreign minister says she's invited the EU's Brexit negotiator to London to discuss the situation as soon as possible.
We're in London and Brussels, but first let's speak to our correspondent Guy Henderson in Westminster. Guy, what's the plan?
Well, this is the same British government, of course, that signed the Brexit agreement with the European Union, and yet it is also the government that now says it doesn't like parts of that agreement and would like changes to it, specifically to the Northern Ireland Protocol, which creates a customs border between Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain. Liz Truss, the British Foreign Minister, outlined to Parliament a little earlier plans to introduce legislation which would unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol, not by completely getting rid of that customs border, she said, but by creating what she described as green channels, where you would have the free flow of goods that were due to travel from the rest of Great Britain only to Northern Ireland, and they would be able to do that in a fairly frictionless manner, but that you would still have customs checks for those goods that were due to carry on into other parts of the European Union, and she said there will be stiff fines for those who tried to flout the rules. That proposal, she said, was the best way to ensure ongoing political stability in Northern Ireland. Let's have a little listen to what she had to say.
I am announcing our intention to introduce legislation in the coming weeks to make changes in the protocol. Our preference remains a negotiated solution with the EU. And in parallel with the legislation being introduced, we remain open to further talks if we can achieve the same outcome through negotiated settlement.
Guy, how's that going to go down in Belfast?
Well, Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, had met with political leaders in Northern Ireland on Monday. The Democratic Unionist Party had said and had already made clear that it would not start negotiating a power-sharing deal with Sinn Féin, the Nationalist Party, which ultimately wants to reunite with Ireland and leave the UK, unless that customs border was scrapped. And we heard from Geoffrey Donaldson in Westminster shortly after that statement from the Foreign Minister, British Foreign Minister, saying that he saw this as a good start, but he didn't give any indication as to whether it was enough of a good start that the DUP might start or restart serious discussions about a possible power-sharing agreement. Sinn Féin has made clear that it strongly opposes this move by the British government. Mary Lou MacDonald had on Monday accused Prime Minister Johnson of orchestrating this whole crisis as a way to try and force Brussels to the negotiating table on this part of the Brexit deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol, and try and get them to compromise. Both sides say they want to get devolved government functioning again in Northern Ireland, particularly given what is quite an increasingly acute cost of living crisis. At the moment, there's just a caretaker government in place with limited powers, but of course they still deeply disagree in some pretty fundamental ways about how to get things going again.
Guy Henderson at Westminster, thank you for now.
Well, let's bring in Mark Webster now, who's in Brussels. So, Mark, the UK is proposing unilaterally changing the Brexit divorce deal. How is that going down where you are?
Well, it's gone down like the proverbial lead balloon. The statement, which was put out by Maroš Šefčovič, who's been leading negotiations here, and may be the one to go to London to discuss this with the British Foreign Secretary, starts out with the usual pleasantries. They want to keep a dialogue going with London. They want to keep open the talks. They want a stable and a trustful relationship with the UK. Then it gets down to the nitty-gritty and says that to abrogate an international treaty like this one is utterly unacceptable. And they go on to say that they'll be using all means at their disposal to hit back. Now, that obviously hints at a trade war. Rather like Guy was saying, Mr. Šefčovič has said several times, look, we understand Britain doesn't like parts of this treaty, but hey, you signed it. It was negotiated after years of really hard bargaining. There was give and take on both sides, and in the end, there's something that they all felt at the time when it was signed. I was here in Brussels when it was signed. There was really the way ahead. What Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, is saying, you cannot at this stage, where you've got a complex international treaty, suddenly start picking away at it and taking out the bits that you like and changing them when, with hindsight, you realise they're not going in your direction. He said, we will try and help. The EU suggested, for instance, they could have kind of fast lane for those businesses which were taking stuff to Northern Ireland where they're considered to be trustworthy and where it was going to Northern Ireland. They say they'll meet them on that, on purely practical matters, but don't try to rewrite a treaty which was so hard to conclude, which is so hard fought, and which we thought was going to be the basis of our relationship, not just for years, but for decades.
So, Mark, how quickly could the EU introduce measures against the UK?
Well, don't hold your breath is what I would say there. The EU has its own slightly ponderous way of doing things. There will be a breathing period, it's compulsory. There then will be anything up to a year before they could impose trade sanctions, because you've got to give due notice to a partner or former partner that this is going to happen. However, if it does happen, it would be very, very serious indeed. We're talking about hundreds of billions of pounds of imports and exports between the European Union and the UK. It's still the UK's biggest trading partner. What might happen instead is that the EU decides on selective sanctions, perhaps against Scotch whisky or against fish. Or it might decide instead that it wants to send a message more quickly to London about its great displeasure with the way things are going. And that would mean, for instance, that they restrict the British fishing fleet from fishing in European waters. All of those are being considered. Now, they've had time to prepare, so it won't be too long coming. However, in the meantime, they'll hope that negotiations do continue, that there is some kind of negotiated settlement, because everybody in this realises brinkmanship is not a good idea when you've got billions of pounds of trade at risk. So they're going to hope they can negotiate something, but the trouble is that in the meantime, any sort of trade sanctions could do huge damage to economies on both sides of the channel.
Mark, thanks very much. That's CGTN's Mark Webster in Brussels.
Amelia Hadfield is a professor of politics at the University of Surrey, and she joins us now. Thanks for coming on the programme. I'm sure you've been listening to our correspondent, so let's talk a little bit more about these plans to override parts of the Brexit treaty. Are they an insurance policy or something else?
Yeah, I think to some extent, at least from the British perspective, there's a sense that the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss really felt compelled on behalf of the British government to try to break the deadlock that's now happened in terms of power-sharing government in Ireland, and of course the wider problems, the very acute problems that the Northern Ireland Protocol has thrown up. So from her perspective, she's making an announcement. She's not laying down legislation, but she's proposing in future legislation that will remove, at least from her perspective, the problems, that will remove east-west barriers that was mentioned a couple of days ago by Prime Minister Johnson, allowing goods to flow between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in particular. And it's the goods going into Northern Ireland effectively that are staying there. Those are the ones that at this point are seen, at least within Northern Ireland, as being subject to unreasonable or even gratuitous checks and paperwork. So from Truss's perspective, from Johnson's perspective, this is an insurance policy. This is something they feel they need to lay down, a law seeking a new regime, a new regulatory outlook to remove the burdens on British goods sold in Northern Ireland and allow, I think, Britain to set new policies, new tax policies and spending policies in Northern Ireland as well as Great Britain.
Amelia, it's a difficult balancing act. So if there is an alternative approach, I wonder what it is.
Well, I think probably it will be a modulation, if you like, between actually having to lay down this paperwork, this legislation, and what the European Union obviously wants, and that's to suggest not ripping up, the protocol and itself as something of a protocol or an annex to the treaty, but trying to find, a mid-range, something that people will be happy with. I think certainly, pulling back, reducing checks and paperwork is incredibly important. I think what Brussels is probably also looking for, and this will go a long way, perhaps, to finding a solution, is data sharing. This is something that was requested by Vice President Šefčovič to assure the European side, that Britain is aware of the integrity of the EU single market, making sure that that's safeguarded. And if that box can be ticked, and the EU can itself understand the position of the Democratic Union as part of the DUP, that they too want to be part of the market. They want to be part of the UK's internal market. Hopefully, with a little bit of give and take and a little bit of diplomacy and even slightly technocratic issues like data sharing, maybe there won't be a need for this legislation actually to have to be laid down at all.
What about maybe a little bit of brinkmanship, some sanctions on Scotch whisky or fish? We're talking about billions of dollars of trade here at risk. Is a trade war inevitable?
I really hope it's not, because we got awfully close to that, even between the sort of mini fish wars we had last summer, as you might remember, between England and France. Those really didn't go particularly well, in the sense it was between Britain and the European Union, but it felt like a sort of a closer rehash of the Cod Wars, if you like, of the 70s. There are a number of outcomes. I'm really hoping that a trade war is the worst possible one and we don't get anywhere near it. Obviously, if we can back away from brinkmanship, and it's a good word for it, if the UK not necessarily climbs down, but perhaps approaches with a more softer requirement. Prime Minister Johnson himself did say he wants a negotiated solution. The UK's preference is for a negotiated solution. And Šefčovič himself wants that. So although there's been fairly hard words today, as you might expect, that's probably, that's sort of the public affairs aspect. The European Union might too need to be able to concede. It may have to change its mandate. There will have to be a compromise. If there's no agreement, however, brinkmanship does seem, and it will ratchet up the tension. The problem is the UK may proceed, not just laying down the legislation itself, but tearing up the protocol, triggering Article 16, and then we really will be in a bit of a mess.
We will. Amelia Hadfield, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. A shake-up in Lebanon as Hezbollah and its allies lose their parliamentary majority in the country's general election.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Hundreds of Ukrainian fighters leave the Mariupol steelworks after being trapped for more than 2 months and are taken into Russian-controlled territory.
President Erdogan says he'll block Finland and Sweden's bids to join NATO, but the Finnish president says he's confident Turkey will change its mind.
Well, Turkey has accused Sweden and Finland of harbouring what it calls Kurdish terrorists. Egemen Bayush is the Turkish ambassador to the Czech Republic. I asked him about Turkey's objections and what it wants from the two Nordic countries.
Well, the relation between Turkey and Sweden goes back to centuries-long history, and we are friends. We are partners. Turkey is an aspiring member of EU, and Sweden has the aspiration to join NATO, where Turkey is one of the founding members. And Turkey just wants Sweden and Finland to clarify that the organization PKK and especially PJAK or YPG are actually terrorist organizations, and we expect them to stop providing financial and military assistance to these groups, which is the main source of the differentiation in the approach, because they do accept PKK as a terrorist organization, but the affiliates, PJAK working in Iran or YPG in Syria, which are taking instructions from PKK, also need to be clarified as terrorist organizations, and our allies should not be supporting them.
So that's what Turkey wants. Without the support of all nations, of course, no one new can join NATO. But do you think that this will go ahead? Will these objections be overcome?
Well, Turkey has very clear expectations, and these are expectations within the standards of NATO. We're not mixing apples and oranges. We're not asking for EU membership in exchange of their NATO membership. What we want is for them to understand that NATO is a security alliance. It's an alliance of cooperation, and they have to stop supporting threats to Turkey's national security, to Turkey's civilian citizens, and to Turkey's well-being. So just like all other allies, we expect Finland and Sweden to declare that they will no longer have any support to these terrorist organizations. And one more condition that Turkey has requested is they should lift the restrictions on arms sales to Turkey. If we're going to be allies, we should not have any restrictions in terms of defense industries toward each other. They might need Turkey's drones. As you know, we are one of the best in the world, Bayraktar, which has been very useful in Ukraine and Karabakh and Turkey and Poland, Estonia, other countries within NATO have started using them. So in the long run, we don't want to impose any sanctions against our potential allies, but they should not have any restrictions against Turkish industry as well.
So you've described the Bayraktar system from Turkey being used in Ukraine. How would you describe Turkey's wider role in the war in Ukraine, and what kind of relationship would it like with Russia now and in the future?
Both Ukraine and Russia are important trading partners for Turkey. We have very good relations. As a matter of fact, 1 out of every 4 tourists that visit Turkey is either Russian or Ukrainian. So we have substantial trade relations with both of them. So it is in our interest to have a permanent ceasefire and to establish peace between these two partner and neighboring countries. And that's why Turkey is working so hard to bring, as we have the foreign ministers of the two countries, we have invited the two presidents of the countries. Also, the delegations for negotiations have met in Istanbul. The foreign ministers of the two countries have met in Antalya. And we are willing to host President Putin and President Zelensky in Turkey as well.
2 days after elections in Lebanon, final results show major shifts in the country's political scene. Iran-backed Hezbollah's coalition lost its majority, and independent candidates won 10% of seats. Our correspondent Mia Alberti reports from Beirut on what this means for the future of Lebanon.
Ahead of the elections, the Lebanese wanted some change, and it seems with these final results that there is some shift on Lebanon's politics, starting with Hezbollah. The Shia Muslim group and its coalition have lost the majority in parliament. They won 62 out of the 128 available seats. That's 3 fewer than what they needed to hold their majority. Not only that, but its Christian ally, the Free Patriotic Movement, has also lost ground to the Saudi-aligned Lebanese forces. One of their strongest campaign promises was to disarm Hezbollah. And this reflects a sentiment from some voters that Hezbollah has lost its image of a revolutionary alternative kind of power, and it's now seen as part of the establishment, or at least protector of it. Hezbollah is part of the political powers that led Lebanon's economy into a collapse, the complete devaluation of the currency, the devastating port explosion, and skyrocketing poverty levels. And that's also what fueled one of the biggest changes we're seeing in these elections, with independent candidates winning 10% of all parliamentary seats. That's a first for post-civil war Lebanon. However, now we have a split parliament, we don't have a clear majority, there's a disgruntled Hezbollah, and so there are concerns that the country might be going into a political paralysis, which would in the end mean the delay of the implementation of the important reforms Lebanon urgently needs to get back on its feet. Mia Alberti, CGTN in Beirut.
Elon Musk says he could pull the plug on his $44 billion Twitter deal if the social media platform fails to prove that spam bots account for fewer than 5% of its users. He made the comments hours after suggesting he could seek a lower price for the company. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, another day, another chance for us to talk about Elon Musk. How serious is he this time?
Yes. Well, I was watching a Channel 4 documentary last night on Elon Musk. He's a very interesting person. He really is. And he's, he has his critics. He really does have serious critics. We're going to have to put those all to just one side for the time being and talk about the businessman only. I think what's happening here is we've moved into public negotiations, and what public negotiations they are as well. You have to remember that Elon Musk knows that he really has the upper hand whenever he takes to Twitter to say these things. He knows that he is very, very powerful on Twitter. And he also knows, I mean, how ironic is it that he knows this and is doing this on Twitter, the company that he's seeking to buy? What you have to remember is there is enormous animosity between the Twitter people and Elon Musk. Now, the Twitter people, generally speaking, are of the left, and they are very irritated that he's taking over the company, and they're very angry that he will let Donald Trump back on if he succeeds in 5 or 6 months' time, whatever it is. So on Friday, if you remember, we had the tweet that said the deal's on hold. Over the weekend, and I told you on yesterday's program, he tweeted out that the fake part of Twitter could be as high as 90%. And now, within the last 24 hours, he's tweeted again. I have quite a bit of reading to do here, so bear with me. He says the Twitter deal cannot move forward unless the spam question is answered. He says 20% spam accounts, while 4 times what Twitter claims, could be much higher. So there he is alluding at the 90% again. My offer was based on Twitter SEC filings, that's the leading regulator, being accurate. Yesterday, he says, Twitter's CEO publicly refused to show proof that the fake accounts amount to less than 5%. And what he's talking about here is the monetizable daily active users. That's the people on the site that Twitter can turn into profits somehow. Now, Twitter says that the fake accounts among them are less than 5%, and Musk simply doesn't believe it. Twitter has said today that it's standing by that 5% figure, and it's working hard to reduce even that. But Elon Musk is looking for a public set of proof now, publicly revealed by Twitter, that the number of monetizable daily active users that are fake is less than 5%. And I think that what this is all about is renegotiating the price. He's paying $54.20 per share. And I think the people surrounding him now, the bankers and the venture capitalists, are saying, look, mate, you can do a better deal than that. And that's what this is all about.
Well, John, let's move away from Musk for just a moment and talk about retail earnings.
Yes.
Take us through them.
Yes. Yeah, what is the betting, though? We'll be back on Elon Musk tomorrow. I think it's pretty high. For today, the other big story here in North America is retail sales. Now, they were good. They came out a couple of hours ago. And month on month, they were up 0.9%, so almost 1%. And year on year, 8.2%. So that's good. That means that the consumer is holding their head above water and still spending, despite the difficult times that we live in. However, there's a slight problem with that because retail sales, they don't take into account, there's no waiting for inflation. So, you know, that's dawning on Wall Street a little bit. And then we had 2 of the biggest retailers in the world reporting today, and their earnings were mixed. Walmart, quite simply the biggest store in the world, more properties, bigger properties, more staff, more stuff for sale. It's absolutely huge. And their sales were up, but their profits were down. And Walmart is blaming just about everything on that. Inflation, wages, shipping costs, supply chain, even overhiring. They say they took on too many people in an emergency a couple of months ago, and more staff than they thought have come back to work for them. And they've also lowered their forecast. So that's the big crime. You should never do that. So Walmart shares, major Dow component, now down 10%. The other one was Home Depot, which is a bit like B&Q or Sainsbury's Homebase in the UK. They have had their best late winter, early spring quarter ever in history. And they have raised their forecast. So they're really saying that people are going to be improving their homes much more in the year ahead. And Home Depot shares were up 7%, though they're down a little bit now. And all of this is leading to a sense that maybe the recession talk that we've been reporting for so long is a little bit overcooked, a little bit overblown. And for that reason, the Dow is now up 1%, 313 points. It'll be down tomorrow, but it's up now.
Well, we will no doubt talk again tomorrow to find out. John Terrett in New York, thank you very much.
See you then. Thanks.
Here in the UK, latest figures show that there are more job vacancies than unemployed people for the first time since records began. But wages are failing to keep up with rising prices for things like food and fuel. The Bank of England warns the cost of living crisis is likely to get worse throughout the year, leading to a possible recession. Well, Mike Schneider's a professor of economics at the University of Bath. Thanks ever so much for coming on the programme. Just how bad is this cost of living crisis in the UK?
Well, thanks for having me on the programme. The cost of living crisis, we all feel it. It's a big squeeze for all of us. We have the highest inflation rate in decades, and it's really driven by energy and food prices. Things that the governor of the Bank of England mentioned today. Now, unfortunately, as you just said, we're in for the long run, and the reasons are the challenges like the war in Ukraine that are likely ongoing. We also see the supply chain challenges around COVID. Like now we have a lockdown in China. That all exacerbates the situation, unfortunately. So we will have to think about living with inflation, high inflation for a long time, and it will be those on the lowest income that are hardest hit.
You mentioned the war in Ukraine, the supply chain issues from COVID as exacerbating the crisis. Are you saying that there are problems that were already there?
Yeah, there are problems that are already there. I mean, we see with the supply chain problems that we have with semiconductors, for example, that are produced in China. We see that wheat can't be shipped out of Ukraine, increasing food prices. So those are issues that need to be resolved for prices to come down. And the Bank of England tries to battle inflation now with high interest rates, but has to tread carefully not to reduce economic growth too much by increasing the interest rates to too high a level. So those are the challenges that we face.
Let's talk about the jobs, because for the first time since record began, there are more job vacancies than unemployed people to fill them. And what does that mean for the economy?
Well, it means to the economy that demand is very high, and we've seen that. We're bringing in people ultimately because, well, demand's picked up from COVID, and it's a good sign. It's a good sign wages are going up, and that drives the inflation now. And basically, so it's good, but wages aren't, as you just said, aren't going up enough, and that's the problem. So we're bringing in people also on lower incomes, but wages are not making up the high inflation, and this is the cost of living crisis that we see.
You talk about having to concentrate more on living within our means. But so let's talk about what happens next, because we've had some pretty tone-deaf suggestions from ministers for people to take on extra jobs, work longer hours, maybe spend less on meals. Should there be more state intervention?
Well, in principle, there are external factors that we discussed, like the Ukraine war, like COVID, that we can't push away. So it will be over a certain period of time, temporary, likely over a 2-year period. That's what the Bank of England forecasts, where things will need, that's the time frame they need to get back to normal, basically. Now, within that time, we want to think about how do we go through this together and support those that need it most. It's those on lowest income that are hardest hit, and that's where the policy focus should be and is, actually. So we can't do away with the external factors for a certain period of time, and we all hope that things will get better, but we will have to find ways to get through this for the next 1-2 years.
Professor Schneider at the University of Bath, thank you.
Thank you.
Still ahead on CGTN. Rolling out the red carpet. Stars of the big screen are back on the French Riviera for the renowned Cannes Film Festival.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul has brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. Sri Lanka's parliament has reconvened for the first time since violence broke out last week and the Prime Minister resigned. The opposition tabled a no-confidence motion against the president, but it was defeated. The new Prime Minister has warned that the country is about to run out of petrol as it faces its worst economic crisis in more than 70 years.
US President Joe Biden and his wife have visited a makeshift memorial to victims of a mass shooting in Buffalo in New York State. They also met privately with survivors and family members of the 10 people killed. A white supremacist is accused of gunning down 10 people in a grocery store on Saturday in what's believed to be a racist killing. Biden called the rampage domestic terrorism and demanded more gun control.
Shanghai has achieved its long-awaited milestone of 3 consecutive days with no new COVID cases outside quarantine zones. The city plans to resume outdoor activities in stages. Authorities say normal life will resume on the 1st of June.
Singapore is looking to regain its position as a top tourist destination.
The city-state has simplified entry for vaccinated travellers, eased domestic restrictions and pledged $500 million to promote tourism.
CGTN's Mira Liu reports.
In a bid to tap into the global wellness travel market, which is expected to reach $1.3 trillion by 2025, Singapore is set to host its first ever wellness festival in June. With over 120 wide-ranging offerings, the 10-day festival aims to establish Singapore as an urban wellness haven.
Our ability to offer highly accessible and must-do, high-quality wellness offerings that allows both the locals as well as our international visitors to rest and rejuvenate in Singapore.
In order to position itself as a go-to destination for tourists coming to this part of the world, Singapore has earmarked $500 million to support its tourism industry. Apart from its urban wellness campaign, the city-state is also building a new integrated sports facility in the heart of Orchard Road in a move to transform the shopping belt into a lifestyle destination.
Beyond lifestyle, industry watchers say that the resumption of business and sporting events, coupled with Singapore's reputation as a safe destination, will also give its tourism industry a boost. What might work against it, experts warn, is Singapore's limitation as a pit stop, since COVID-19 has made multi-destination travel less popular.
We need to be 5 days, 7 days, 1 week kind of destination. We've got culture, we've got cityscape, we've got shopping, we've got Sentosa. So Singapore has a lot to offer. We must not sell ourselves short. We must sell the fun quotient to be multidimensional.
For me, the buzzword is, and we're seeing this in the travel industry, is personalization. Travelers are now not just looking for a destination and what you have to offer. Can I go to that destination and enjoy things that are meaningful to me, that make sense to me? And we're seeing a lot of thought go into this.
Just easing of travel and domestic restrictions over the last few weeks has already resulted in Changi passenger traffic to double from March to April. But as other popular destinations such as Thailand and Indonesia open their borders, how big of a share will Singapore get from this pent-up travel demand is the multi-million-dollar question. Mira Liu, CGTN, Singapore.
After 2 years of COVID disruption, film stars are coming out for the Cannes Film Festival.
The French Riviera gathering opens on Tuesday in the shadow of the war in Ukraine. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson has more from the red carpet.
The sun is shining on the golden beaches of the French Riviera as the world of cinema returns for the 75th Cannes Film Festival. Preparations have been underway at the iconic Palais de Festival for a star-studded opening night.
Tuesday will be the big day, laying the carpet. So here we are, coming to the end after 3 weeks of getting things ready.
French actor Vincent Lindon will lead the festival's international jury. He'll also host the opening evening Tuesday night, which kicks off with the premiere of Final Cut, a film critics call a comedy love letter to filmmaking and Z-list zombie movies.
Laurent, il devient Akira, Muriel, elle devient Natsumi, et Anaïs, elle devient Shinasu. Et moi, je suis Ken.
This time around, the impact of the COVID pandemic is only minimal compared with the last 2 years when festivities were scaled back significantly. But the war in Ukraine is casting its own shadow over the festival. A handful of Russian directors will have their movies screened, but delegates from the country's Ministry of Culture have been uninvited.
I would try to make a distinction between the Russians who take risks, once again to resist the official line, to those who want to denounce what is happening. And obviously, this is the position of the festival, by showing absolute and non-negotiable support to the Ukrainian people and their representatives.
That support will also include special screenings of Ukrainian films, something festival organizers want to put front and center. Ryan Thompson, CGTN.
The headlines again. Hundreds of Ukrainian fighters leave the Mariupol steelworks after being trapped for more than 2 months and are taken to Russian-controlled territory.
President Erdogan says he'll block Finland and Sweden's bids to join NATO, but the Finnish president says he's confident Turkey will change its mind.
And the British government will change the law to override parts of the Brexit deal on Northern Ireland, but says it will keep talking to the EU.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on Smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.